Good evening, everyone. Tonight we journey not through fairy tales or cozy bedtime fables, but into the polished marble heart of ancient Rome. Picture it. The sun is setting over the Forum, casting golden light across the shoulders of stoic statues and glinting off rooftops like the gods themselves dropped gold leaf on the city. Senators stroll in flowing togas, shouting at each other in Latin. A chorus of footsteps echoes down colonnaded boulevards. It's stunning, breathtaking, timeless. But don't get too comfortable. Beneath that glorious veneer lies something darker, something built on backs that bent until they broke. And tonight we're going there, into the world of the Roman slaves. A world so vast, so essential, so brutally ordinary, you might not even notice it at first. But once you're in it, well, let's just say you might not get out. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? It's always fascinating to see how far this little nighttime community stretches across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin tonight's journey. Imagine the Roman Empire at its height. Roads stretching across continents, aqueducts defying gravity, armies so disciplined they could march through mud and win medals for it. Rome wasn't just a city, it was an idea, a statement of power, of permanence, of we're better than you and we've got the plumbing to prove it. But all of that splendor, those towering columns, those echoing marble halls, came at a price, a human price, and not the kind they taught you about in school. See, for every toga-wrapped philosopher sipping watered wine in a villa, there were dozens, hundreds of people without names, without choices, without freedom. Slaves. They didn't vote. They didn't philosophize. They didn't tour the Colosseum unless they were cleaning it or bleeding in it. Let's start with the numbers, because they don't whisper. They scream. In ancient Italy during the late Republic and early Empire, about 1 in every 3 people was a slave. 1 in 3. In Rome itself, even worse, nearly 40% of the population. That's not a footnote, that's a foundation. Slavery wasn't a glitch in the system, it was the system. If something needed doing, building, sweeping, cooking, dyeing, it was probably done by someone who had no say in the matter. And no, it wasn't just the way things were, it was enforced, celebrated, etched into law. But this isn't about abstract systems. This is about real people, like Lyra, a teenage girl from the Greek islands, taken when her city fell. She had soft hands and could play the lyre. That made her valuable. Sold in Rome for 2,000 sesterces to a wealthy senator who wanted background music at his banquets. She wore silk, but only to match the furniture. Or Marcus, a brawny farmhand from Gaul. He was barely 20. Strong as an ox, and treated exactly like one. Sold for half Lyra's price to an estate outside the city, he didn't play music, he pushed plows. And if he fell sick, he'd be replaced, no refunds. They came from everywhere, conquered cities, raided villages, ships that didn't quite make it home, children born in captivity, infants abandoned at temples, even debtors and criminals who crossed the wrong senator or simply couldn't pay for a loaf of bread. You didn't have to be foreign, you just had to be unlucky. And once you were in, there was no out. They didn't call you a person, they called you a thing. You had no rights, no protection, and no tomorrow unless someone else permitted it. Marriage, only if your owner allowed it. Religion, same deal. Property, forget it. You were property, a body with a price tag and an expiration date. And yet the empire rolled on, gilded and gleaming because of them. Every road laid, every stone carved, every feast prepared, made possible by invisible hands. History remembered the emperors. It forgot their dishwashers. So tonight we begin with those forgotten hands. With the voices that were silenced, the names erased, the lives never given the dignity of being called lives, because they mattered. And if the empire stood on their backs, then maybe, just maybe, we owe them at least a whisper. Welcome to Rome. Welcome to Rome, again. But this time we're not on the grand marble steps of the Senate or under the glittering chandeliers of a patrician's villa. No, we're diving into the part of the city that people didn't paint on pottery, the side that smelled less like incense and more like desperation. Let's talk about the people who made Rome function, day in and day out. The slaves. They weren't just background extras in togas, they were the engine. And this engine ran everywhere, on every street, in every home, in every field, from the sunny vineyards to the cold stone cellars. Picture this. You walk into a wealthy Roman household. Columns, fountains, a bust of Jupiter staring at you like he owns the place. But behind every clean floor is a slave on hands and knees. Behind every steaming bath is a slave with a bucket. Behind every roast peacock is a slave who plucked it, roasted it, and didn't get a single bite. One of those slaves might be someone like Selena. She's 24, born in captivity, raised among marble walls and strict rules. Her job, personal maid to the lady of the house. She wakes before sunrise, lays out tunics, combs hair, keeps silent unless spoken to. She knows more about her mistress's secrets than her mistress does, but she doesn't dare breathe a word, not if she values her life or her tongue. Selena walks through rooms she'll never own, touches perfumes she'll never wear, and listens to conversations where her presence is never acknowledged. She's trained to be invisible. And that invisibility isn't safety, it's control. Now let's take a walk beyond the city to where things get even worse. Meet Drusus. He's 35, tall, broad-shouldered, and completely broken. He works on a latifundium, one of Rome's sprawling agricultural estates. These aren't your average farms, they're production monsters designed to feed entire cities. Drusus doesn't farm for himself or even for a local lord. He farms for an empire that doesn't know he exists. His day starts before the sky lightens. A whistle, a slap on the barracks door. Time to move. He eats a chunk of stale bread, maybe a scoop of pottage that's more sadness than stew, and heads out with the others. They don't talk much. Talking gets you noticed, and getting noticed gets you punished. The field stretches ahead like a punishment in landscape form. Drusus and the others plow, weed, harvest, hour after hour under the eye of a villicus, the estate manager. Sometimes the villicus is a freedman, sometimes another slave. Either way, his job is clear: keep everyone moving. And if that means whips, threats, or the occasional disappearance, so be it. Here's a fun fact. Fun in the Roman sense, which means horrifying. Roman agricultural texts didn't just describe how to grow olives, they gave advice on how to break a man's spirit. One suggested working slaves so hard that they're too tired to rebel, too exhausted to dream. Selena might envy Drusus for having a breath of country air. Drusus might envy Selena for living indoors. But the truth is, neither of them envies anything anymore. That requires hope. And hope is not included in the cost of captivity. What about downtime, you ask? Time off? Holidays? Think again. Rome loved its festivals. Yes, but not all masters did. A few allowed their slaves a day of rest here or there. A few even let them keep a tiny portion of their earnings if they were skilled workers. But out on the farms, on the latifundia, a day off meant you only had to carry stones, not haul water too. And if you're thinking, at least they had shelter, allow me to disabuse you of that tiny mercy. Slave barracks were exactly as charming as they sound. Cramped, windowless, crawling with lice, and worse. Picture a shed, subtract comfort, then multiply by 30 people. No beds, just straw. No privacy, no locks. You slept shoulder to shoulder, snore to snore, dream to dream. If you were lucky, you only had to share your blanket with fleas. If you were unlucky, with rats too. And yet they endured. That might be the most Roman thing of all. Not the grandeur, not the conquest, but the sheer gritted teeth endurance. But let's not pretend they were robots. These were people, thinking, grieving, fearing, remembering. Selena still hums songs her mother whispered during laundry hours. Drusus sometimes traces names in the dirt, names he barely remembers, family he'll never see again. Their lives weren't just tragedy, they were trapped tragedy. And here's where things get darker. Because when a slave like Drusus becomes unproductive, say his back gives out or an infection takes hold, there's no pension plan, no thanks for your service fruit basket, no gentle sunset years. He is discarded, sold off cheap, or worse, simply thrown out, left to beg or die. The Roman elder Cato, the kind of man who probably scowled in the womb, had some business advice. He said to sell your old slaves when they could no longer work, just like you'd sell a broken plow or a sick ox. Don't feed them. Don't waste good bread. Replace them. A few masters ignored that advice. A few gave aging slaves a corner of the garden and let them sit in the sun. But that was rare. Mercy, like freedom, cost extra. So what did slaves dream of? Some dreamed of being freed. Rare, but not impossible. Skilled slaves could sometimes buy their freedom. Others were granted it by a benevolent master. A few rose high enough to manage households, even run businesses. But for every Lyra or Selena who dared imagine a different life, there were 100 others who knew better. Freedom was a lottery where most tickets were blank. And if you dared run, if you slipped away under cover of night and made it a mile out of town, you were hunted, publicly, brutally. Roman law allowed and encouraged owners to mutilate runaway slaves as a warning to others. Branding, beatings, execution. The message was clear: you belong to us. Still, some tried, some ran, some even made it, but most didn't. And that's the world we're in now. Not just the villas and amphitheaters, but the barracks and kitchens, the hidden Rome, the Rome that whispered and wept while the empire shouted and sang. This isn't the end of their story, it's only the beginning. The Roman Empire, as it turns out, didn't just build roads, it built a human assembly line, a machine of muscle and obedience, and tonight we keep walking along that line. But let's step away from the city and the villas. Let's leave Selena and Drusus behind for a moment. Because as harsh as life was in Roman households or on the latifundia, things got even worse. Yes, worse, in places where the sun never reached. The mines. Imagine descending into the earth with nothing but a crude lamp and the certainty that your bones might stay down there forever. Mines were hell, if hell were darker, colder, and paid in lash marks. Slaves like Cassius, let's say he's 32, from somewhere north of the Danube, were condemned to work the quarries and mines that fueled Rome's hunger for gold, silver, salt, and stone. The empire loved its marble, but it didn't love the hands that carved it from the mountains. Cassius doesn't know what time it is. There's no sky underground, no seasons, only the scrape of metal on stone, the groan of wooden supports, and the coughs of men who haven't seen clean air in years. He swings a pickaxe until his arms shake, not to build a monument, just to stay alive another day. If a tunnel collapses, and they often do, he won't be rescued. He'll be buried with the others. The only relief? You won't feel the whip anymore. Now, back on the surface, not every slave was a laborer. Some were trained, some were educated, because Rome, in all its contradictions, could turn a captive into a clerk. A slave like Leander, 40 years old, sharp-eyed, calm, might be a doctor, a teacher, even a financial manager. Leander belonged to a noble family in Rome, and he ran their books better than any freeborn accountant. He was trusted, valued even, but never free. He dined alone, even when invited to the table. He wore a better tunic, but still had to bow his head. He could recite Virgil, diagnose an illness, balance an estate, and still be sold tomorrow, like pottery. Knowledge was not a shield, only a more polished chain. And yet, some masters offered a sliver of hope: manumission, the act of freeing a slave. It could come as a reward, or a symbolic gesture, or a legal maneuver. A freedman or libertus gained limited rights, could marry, own property, even vote. But Rome had rules for everything. A freedman still owed loyalty to his former master, still carried a mark of origin like a branded signature on the soul. Even then, the path wasn't open to all. Cassius in the mines? Never. Drusus, broken-backed and limping? No chance. Manumission was not justice, it was convenience, wrapped in ritual. And what about rebellion? Did no one fight back? Ah, but they did. Enter Spartacus. You've heard the name. The gladiator. The rebel. The man Rome feared enough to crucify by the thousands. Spartacus wasn't born to lead a revolution. He was born to be entertainment. A Thracian, trained as a soldier, captured, enslaved, and sent to a ludus, a gladiator school where men were sharpened like knives for the arena. He escaped, with a handful of other fighters, then with dozens. then with thousands. Soon, 70,000 escaped slaves marched through Italy. Not just warriors, women, children, farmers, miners, cooks. A moving city of the desperate. They didn't want to burn Rome. They wanted to go home. But Rome didn't allow that. Rome never tolerated rebellion. So the Senate sent armies, and Spartacus sent them back in pieces. For a while, the rebellion lasted 2 years. Then the hammer fell. The general Crassus trapped the rebels, slaughtered them, and ordered 6,000 survivors crucified along the Appian Way. A straight road, a clear message. Cross Rome, and Rome will line the highway with your bones. No memorials, no tombs, just skeletons swaying in the sun. Back in the households, the message was heard loud and clear. Slaves who'd whispered of freedom now whispered no more. Leander kept his head down. Selina learned to smile when spoken to. Drusus worked until he couldn't stand. But history, cruel as it is, doesn't erase them completely. Fragments remain. Graffiti scrawled in kitchens, names etched on slave collars, old letters referring to someone's trusted boy or my Greek girl. We don't know most of their names. We don't know their songs, their dreams, their favorite season, their jokes. But we do know this. They were human. They laughed, they bled, they feared the dark. They wanted to rest, to belong, to be seen. They were not footnotes. They were the ink. They were not shadows. They were the shape. Rome did not build itself. And tonight, as you drift off, let that thought settle in your chest like slow thunder. It wasn't just marble and glory. It was also Lyra's song, Cassius's breath, Drusus's blood, Selina's silence, and Leander's pen. The empire stands on their bones. You've seen the palaces, you've felt the whips, you've met Selina, Drusus, Leander, Lyra, and Cassius. And by now, one truth is clear. The Roman Empire wasn't just built by slaves. It was built for them to stay that way. But slavery in Rome wasn't one single experience. It was a spectrum, a grim sliding scale of exploitation. And where you landed on that scale often came down to 3 things: what you could do, who you belonged to, and whether anyone noticed if you vanished. Take Tavia. She's 28, born on a villa just outside Capua. Her mother was a kitchen slave. Her father, well, no one ever said. She grew up learning to grind grain, carry jugs of water, soothe crying infants that weren't hers. When she was 12, she was moved to the weaving room. At 16, she was assigned to the nursery. By 20, she was raising the master's children while her own were taken from her. Tavia had no papers, no rights, and no say in what came next. But she knew how to read the moods of her mistress, how to comfort a feverish child, how to disappear when voices got too loud. She was what Romans called domestica, a house slave, considered lucky by some. But here's the thing, comfort isn't freedom. A silk cushion is still a cage if you can't leave the room. Out in the countryside, conditions were harsher and colder, especially on the latifundia. Flavia, 50, worked most of her life in the olive groves. When she was young, she could climb trees faster than anyone. She tied her tunic at the knees and beat branches with a stick until her arms went numb. She kept up with the men, outpaced many. Her master was proud of her yield, called her his little branch shaker. But now, her joints ache, her breath wheezes. She's not fast, not useful. And in Rome, not useful means not worth feeding. No pension, no retirement, no thank you for 30 years of loyal service. Just a nod from the overseer, a half loaf of bread. A suggestion that maybe she'd be better off begging near the aqueduct. Rome, after all, was efficient, and ruthlessness is just efficiency with the empathy removed. You might think, surely not all masters were like this, and you'd be right, technically. Some were kinder. Some allowed their slaves small luxuries, festive clothes during Saturnalia, the right to marry unofficially, even a tiny garden patch. But here's the catch. Even the kindest master still owned you. Kindness didn't cancel control. Tavia could be gifted a necklace one day, then be whipped the next. Flavia could be allowed to nap during the heat, then be sold during a debt crisis. Your life was a coin in someone else's purse. And then there were the laws. Roman law didn't just allow slavery, it optimized it. If you killed your master, even in self-defense, every slave in the household could be executed, all of them. The logic? They should have stopped it, as if fear, powerlessness, and chains were excuses to be disloyal. And if you were pregnant, your child was automatically a slave, born into servitude, born into someone else's ledger. Now, some slaves dreamed of freedom. A few, like Leander, studied hard, saved coins, maybe even earned their manumission, but most knew better. Most knew that hope was the first thing Rome took and the last thing it gave back. But even in that grim world, there were glimmers of humanity. There were friendships, secret and dangerous, jokes whispered in the corner, songs hummed while hauling grain, a stolen moment of laughter at the absurdity of a senator trying to ride a horse sideways. Even love bloomed. Tavia once fell for a fellow servant named Pollio. He worked the stables. Their stolen glances were the only thing that made breakfast bearable. For a while, they dreamed of buying their freedom together. But then Pollio was sold. Just like that. One morning, she brought him a crust of bread. That evening, he was gone. No goodbye. No clue where, or if. Rome was like that. Sudden. So where did all this lead? To the idea that Rome was great because of slavery, not in spite of it. The aqueducts, built by slaves. The Colosseum, raised by slaves, cleaned by slaves, filled with slaves. The bustling port of Ostia, manned by slaves. Even the scrolls in the libraries, copied by literate slaves who never got to read for pleasure. Rome told itself a story, that it was a beacon of civilization, a torchbearer in a world of darkness. But the flame was fed with flesh, and yet the world admired it. Still does. Tourists snap selfies in front of columns carved by men who died forgotten. Textbooks praise the legal system that defined human beings as objects. Movies show the glory, but not the gruel. But we remember. That's what tonight is about. Not just the structures, not just the emperors, but the forgotten millions who made the emperors look grand. As you lie back, maybe under a warm blanket, maybe with a fan humming softly in the background, think of Flavia in the olive grove, of Tavia in the nursery, of Leander at his desk. Think of what they endured quietly, endlessly. Their stories weren't written on scrolls, but they're still here, etched in stone, buried in ash, whispered in dreams. And we're not done yet. Night falls again over the empire. But while senators toast their wine under candlelit ceilings and noble women lounge beside marble fountains, elsewhere in Rome, where the shadows are deeper and the air colder, another day of invisible labor ends in silence. Tonight we return to that silence. Let's follow Leander again, the 40-year-old slave who manages accounts for a wealthy Roman family. He sits in a corner of the study, surrounded by wax tablets and ink pots. He's tired, but not from work. He's tired of being. He calculates how many olives were harvested, how many amphorae sold, which merchants need payment. His handwriting is flawless, his sums exact. He even corrects his master's son's grammar when the boy leaves his school scrolls open. And yet, when guests arrive, Leander disappears. Not physically, he just becomes part of the background. No one greets him, no one asks his opinion. He's a talking abacus. He eats after everyone else, alone. He sleeps near the storeroom in a space barely larger than the bench he works on. He has thoughts, sharp ones. He once drafted a witty retort to a visiting poet who couldn't count past 20, but he never spoke it aloud. Wit in a slave is dangerous. Best to keep one's cleverness folded up like a spare tunic. Remember her? Remember her? She's still there too, in that grand domus with its mosaic floors and imported lamps. The lady of the house now has a new obsession, Egyptian perfume. Selina spends hours boiling petals, straining herbs, trying to mimic the exotic scent her mistress smelled once at a senator's banquet. If she fails, well, her mistress has a very short temper and a very long ladle. Selina's hands are always stained, spices, oil, wine. She doesn't remember what her own voice sounds like when she speaks without permission. Once she tried to sing quietly while scrubbing floors. A guest heard her and told the master she should be punished for distracting the air. Now she only sings in her head. But across the empire, in fields far from the perfume of Roman villas, the work is still endless. Drusus is not alone out there. Men like him, burly, silent, sunburned, are the gears of Roman agriculture. They plant, prune, dig, and repeat. It's a rhythm as old as war and just as brutal. This morning, a younger slave collapsed in the field. Heat stroke. He was dragged to the side and left in the shade. No one stopped. Drusus didn't stop, not because he didn't care, because he couldn't. One moment of hesitation, one misplaced tool, one glance too long, and the villicus would raise his voice and his hand. Later, the boy was gone. No one asked where. In the Roman view, a good slave was silent, efficient, and above all, replaceable. You didn't lose a slave, you misplaced a tool. And tools could be reordered. Even in death, there was no ceremony, no tombs, no prayers. Unless the master allowed it, which was rare. Most were buried in shared pits. A few had their ashes scattered with animal bones. The lucky ones got a small charm, a coin, a name scratched onto a shard of pottery, and yet, somehow, they still clung to identity. Some slaves carved their names in hidden places, on the underside of stools, in the beams of kitchens, scratched faintly into the backs of tiles. Little whispers of, "I was here," like Leander once scratched the Greek word for free beneath his writing bench. Just once, just to see it. But let's pull back for a moment. Rome wasn't the first to enslave. It wouldn't be the last. But what makes Rome stand out, what makes it echo in the bones of history, is how normal it made slavery feel. It wasn't questioned, it was codified, it was advertised in markets, praised in literature, even joked about in theater. A Roman joke, what do you call a lazy slave? Answer, dead. Hilarious. And the upper class, they saw themselves as benevolent rulers of their households. Paterfamilias, they called it, the father of the family. A master's power was absolute, over wife, children, and especially slaves. He could free them, he could kill them, he could marry them off, or not. Sometimes slaves were more educated than their masters. Leander could quote Homer while his master struggled with arithmetic. But it didn't matter, blood outranked brains. Citizenship beat brilliance. Still, life within the system had nuances. Some masters allowed their slaves to earn small amounts of money. Peculium, it could be used to buy treats, or, after years, freedom. But let's not romanticize that. Saving enough to buy yourself was like trying to pay off a mansion mortgage with pocket change while still being charged rent. And even freedmen weren't free. Their children could be citizens. Yes, but they themselves owed lifelong loyalty to their former master. Rome never let you forget your place. It just let you move a little closer to the edge of the table. So what did survival look like? For Selena, silence, routine, obedience. Her rebellion was not flinching when the mistress screamed. For Drusus, repetition, muscle memory, numbness. His triumph was finishing a day without collapse. For Leander, dignity and detail. He could not be seen, but he made sure the numbers added up, and in that he found control, not freedom, not justice, just control. But in a system built to erase people, that control meant something. Every joke whispered between chores, every piece of bread shared, every lullaby hummed in a language long forgotten by their masters. Those small moments, they were victories. Quiet, defiant, invisible victories. And now, thousands of years later, those moments still matter. Not because they toppled an empire, but because they proved something that Rome itself forgot, that humanity cannot be fully crushed. Not by law, not by chain, not by silence. The Roman Empire is gone, its palaces crumbled, its gods forgotten, but its slaves, we remember them now, one name at a time. The sun rises again over Rome, gilding the rooftops with light that never quite reaches the alleyways. In the courtyards, fountains burble. In the Senate, voices rise in debate. And below all of that, out of sight, out of mind, the slaves stir. They are already awake. They have been for hours. Let's begin this final chapter not in the grandeur of the capital or the heat of the countryside, but in a place the empire rarely bragged about, the slave market. Imagine it, a wide square, dusty and loud. Wooden platforms creak underfoot. Banners flap above merchant stalls, children cry, vendors shout about olive oil and figs. And in the middle of it all, a cluster of humans stands motionless, stripped, silent, displayed. These are not statues. These are people, lined up, examined like cattle. A man prods a boy's teeth with a stick, nods approvingly. A woman lifts a girl's arm to check for bruises. A potential buyer circles slowly around a teenager, not looking at her face, just her hips. No one asks names, only prices. Lyra stands there again. Remember her? The gifted young girl from Greece, taken after her city fell. She plays the lyre. She speaks 2 languages. Her eyes dart everywhere, calculating odds like a gambler in a rigged game. Next to her, a boy, barely 15, is crying without sound. His name is Attius, but no one here will use it. He came from a fishing village, caught in a pirate raid, sold to middlemen who kept him locked in a cellar for weeks. Now he's here, skin pale from lack of sun, arms thin, eyes dull. A man with rings on every finger stops in front of him, tilts his head, snaps his fingers. The auctioneer nods, and Attius is pulled off the platform. Sold. Just like that. He doesn't even know what city he's going to. Maybe he'll end up in the mines, maybe the kitchens, maybe somewhere worse, but he won't get to choose. His story has already been rewritten by someone else's hand. Back in the heart of Rome, in houses like the one where Selena works, the day has begun. She moves through routines without thinking. Sweep, stir, pour, fold, smile, repeat. She notices everything. The mistress's mood, the guest's perfume, the growing stain on the mosaic that someone's pretending not to see. Selena has learned how to survive without standing out. She's mastered the delicate art of invisibility. The highest compliment she ever hears? I forgot you were even there. In the garden, Leander adjusts his master's accounts. He's managed to negotiate better grain prices, saving the household a small fortune. His reward? A nod, a muttered good. He does not speak, unless invited. He does not laugh. He once owned a joke, something about a senator, a donkey, and a mispronounced Latin phrase, but he hasn't dared share it in years. Further out, in the hills, Drusus limps across a rocky path with 2 buckets balanced on a yoke. His back screams with every step. His left foot drags slightly, a legacy from a fall last winter. The overseer hasn't noticed yet, or maybe he has. Maybe he's waiting until the limp becomes a reason to discard. Drusus has no plan, no escape, no dreams, just one thought over and over: keep walking. And that is slavery's deepest cruelty. Not just the work, not just the beatings, but the way it reshapes your thoughts until keep walking is the only thing left. Even in death, there is little dignity. In a mass grave outside the city, hundreds of bones lie tangled. No names, no dates, just fragments. A skull with a dent, a femur snapped and never healed, a ring still on one finger, cheap bronze, green with corrosion. Maybe it belonged to a freedman. Maybe it was buried with hope. Hope was rare, but not extinct. Because even in the darkest corners of Rome, some slaves dared to resist. Not always with knives or fire, but with memory. Some scratched messages into walls, a name, a prayer, a curse. Some passed down lullabies in languages the empire had tried to erase. Some taught their children, if they could keep them, to remember where they came from. Resistance didn't always look like Spartacus. Sometimes it looked like Lyra quietly playing a melody from her homeland, even when told to stop. Sometimes it looked like Selena giving a bruised servant girl an extra fig. Sometimes it looked like Leander miscalculating a tax collection by a few denarii, just enough to keep a cruel master from getting richer. Tiny rebellions, undetected, unrecorded, unforgiven, but real. And that brings us to today, because the Roman Empire is gone. Its palaces are ruins, its laws, relics, its glory, dust. But the stories of its slaves, those live on, not in monuments, but in memory. You remember Lyra, you remember Drusus, you remember Selena, Leander, Tavia, Cassius, Attius, and in remembering, you undo the silence the empire built around them. They weren't property, they weren't tools, they weren't shadows, they were people. And tonight, you gave them back their voices. So sleep well, friend. The empire may have forgotten them, but you didn't. You might think the story ends there. Cruelty exposed, silence broken, the past wrapped in remembrance. But memory is a stubborn thing. It doesn't stay quiet just because the final page has turned. Tonight, in part 7, we don't continue the tale. We sit with it. We live in the world that came after Rome. a world shaped not just by emperors and generals, but by the invisible millions who never had a chance to tell their side. And their shadow is still long. So let's spend one more night walking with them. Not in the fields, not in the kitchens, but in the in-between places. The small gaps between labor and sleep, between duty and disappearance, where identity tries to survive. Take Marcus. You remember him? The 20-year-old from Gaul, sold cheap for muscle, put to work in the vineyards. The records say he was transferred to a villa near Naples after a bountiful harvest. They say he was a sturdy investment. What they don't say is that Marcus could draw. He had no paper, no ink, no formal training, but give him a stick and a patch of dirt, and he could make birds take flight. His lines were fast, alive, almost defiant. He once scratched a lion into the wall of a storage room. It was small, almost hidden, but the eyes looked straight out. Unafraid. The master had it scrubbed off. But Marcus did it again, somewhere else. And again. Every line a whisper. I am still here. He never escaped. But his marks outlived him. Then there's Unia. She was born in a Roman house, the child of 2 household slaves. Her mother folded linens like art. Her father poured wine at banquets where senators laughed at jokes he couldn't afford to find funny. Unia watched, learned. By 12, she was sewing better than the freeborn girls she served. By 15, she spoke 3 languages. By 17, she'd stopped looking anyone in the eye. But Unia had a secret. At night, when the house went quiet and the dogs stopped barking, she'd creep into the atrium and read the scrolls left on the tutor's bench. Fast, by lamplight. 1 paragraph at a time. She memorized laws, poetry, inventories. When the master's son asked for help with his schoolwork, Unia would pretend not to know the answer until he left the room. Then she'd solve the problem and leave it on his desk. No name, no praise. She couldn't claim knowledge, but she could have it. Years later, the master died and the household scattered. Unia was sold to a senator who wanted a Greek tutor for his daughter. He never asked where she'd learned so much. Now she sits in the corner of a warm study, listening to a child stumble through Homer. She doesn't speak unless asked, but her eyes gleam when the girl gets the lines right. She's not free, but she's not erased. And in Rome, that's something. Let's not romanticize this. Most slaves did not learn to read. Most didn't draw lions or memorize poetry. Most, like Drusus and Flavia, lived and died in brutal routine, remembered only as a number on a tax roll or a mark on a ledger. But here's the secret no empire ever wants to admit. Human dignity is resilient. It slips through cracks. It blooms in the dirt. Even in the worst systems, people find ways to be people. A stolen laugh, a lullaby passed down, a dream whispered under breath. And Rome, for all its might, never managed to kill that completely. That's why in graffiti scratched on old stone, archaeologists sometimes find little jokes, a crude drawing, a name carved in a place no name should be. One read, Felix lived. That's it, 2 words, no date, no story. But it matters because someone, maybe Felix himself, maybe a friend, refused to let him vanish entirely. In a world built to forget, they carved a reminder. Tonight, we honor that. This story hasn't been about statistics or systems. It's been about people, real or fictionalized, but always human. People whose lives weren't grand, but were the ground that grand things stood on. And maybe you're wondering why this matters now. Rome fell. Its chains are gone. We live in a different world. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The echoes remain. In every society built on invisible labor, in every system where comfort for a few rests on the exhaustion of the many, in every city where names get erased unless someone insists otherwise. So what do we do with that? We remember. We speak their names, even if they're made up, even if they were never written down. We tell their stories, not to pity them, but to restore them. Because history isn't just about what survived, it's about who deserved to. Marcus, Unia, Selena, Drusus, Tavia, Leander, Lyra, Cassius, Flavia, Attius, and Felix. Let's say their names like prayers, like rebellion, like truth. Let's leave space for the lives between the scrolls and statues. Let's remember what Rome tried to forget, and in doing so, let's make sure they are never invisible again. Now dim the lights just a little more. Let the quiet settle, let the story linger. Sleep well, because tonight you carried history not in your hands, but in your heart. By now you know the pattern. Rome rises, slaves toil, and the story continues, unfolding quietly beneath the thunder of history. But even as we near the end of this journey, there are corners we haven't turned, voices we haven't heard, and truths we haven't fully faced. Tonight, in Part 8, we go deeper, not into the marble halls or blood-soaked arenas, but into the psychology of it all. The how. How did an entire civilization convince itself that slavery wasn't just acceptable, but essential? The answer? Routine. Slavery in Rome wasn't a shock. It wasn't even discussed. It was normal. So normal that free citizens barely noticed it unless a task wasn't done. So normal that children grew up watching people be sold and never asked why. So normal that cruelty was considered structure, not sin. It's one thing to be oppressed. It's another to live inside a world where your oppression is invisible, even to your oppressors. Let's begin with a Roman child. His name is Publius. He's 5. He plays with a wooden sword and chases chickens in the villa courtyard. When he's thirsty, he claps and water appears. He doesn't know where it comes from. When his sandals go missing, someone is beaten. He doesn't know why. He's not evil. He's just growing up in a world where people like Selena and Marcus aren't people at all. They're furniture, tools, background noise. By the time Publius is 15, he's quoting Cicero and managing land accounts. He gives orders with confidence because no one ever told him not to. He's been taught law, philosophy, rhetoric, but never compassion for those beneath him. Because in his world, there is no beneath. There is only natural order. And if one day Marcus disappears from the vineyard, Publius notices only that the yield goes down. This is how empires maintain injustice, not just through force, but through familiarity, through stories repeated until they sound like facts, through laws that speak of duties and rights without ever asking who wrote them. And what about the slaves themselves? What happens when you live so long in captivity that it starts to feel like identity? This is where it gets more complex. Leander, remember, is brilliant, literate, strategic. But even he, after 40 years, walks with a bowed neck, not because he believes in his inferiority, but because he knows what happens when others do. He dreams sometimes of a small house on the edge of the city, a library, a citrus tree. But he doesn't write it down. He doesn't speak it aloud. Hope for him is like a bird in a cage, beautiful but too noisy to be safe. Tavia, who spent her life raising other people's children, once whispered to a fellow servant, "I think I would have been a good mother." She said it like a confession, like a crime. Because in Rome, her body was property. Her emotions didn't belong to her. And yet, in the quiet, they still hoped, still imagined, still remembered who they might have been. Even the state had a role in enforcing forgetfulness. Slave collars were common, actual metal bands worn around the neck, inscribed with messages like, "If you find me, return me to my master. Reward guaranteed." Imagine that, walking through the forum surrounded by statues of gods and heroes, with a piece of iron around your throat like a dog. And still, some of them resisted. Some slaves ran, not toward freedom, but away from being known, away from the whip, away from the voice that called them boy or girl long after they grew old. Others resisted in subtler ways, like Cato, a slave who faked an injury for weeks so he could sabotage shipments from a cruel master's estate. He was never caught. His name doesn't appear in any records, but the delay he caused led to lost profits and, eventually, the estate being sold. He didn't burn anything. He didn't kill. He just slowed the machine. Even that was enough. Then there were those who didn't resist at all, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Because resistance in Rome was often a one-way street ending in a ditch. So many stories went untold, so many names unspoken, so many lives reduced to roles: cook, porter, wet nurse, laborer. But here's what Rome didn't expect, that we would remember. Not the glory, not the conquest, the people. The ones who washed Caesar's robes, who built the aqueducts, who raised the children of senators, who carved lions into the walls just to feel seen. because when history forgets, imagination must remember. Tonight, you've walked through shadowed vineyards, you've crouched in dim kitchens, you've counted coins with Leander, carried jugs with Drusus, hummed lullabies with Tavia. You felt their world press in tight, cold, unjust, but you've also heard their voices, and in a way that's more powerful than any monument, because Rome had marble. But we have memory, and memory, unlike marble, doesn't crack in the rain, it grows. Let it grow in you. Let it keep you awake for a moment longer. And when you sleep, let it follow you, not like a ghost, but like a whisper. I was here. Don't forget me. Tonight, as the Empire sleeps beneath its stars and colonnades, we descend into one of its final, quietest chambers, the aftermath. The question that echoes long after the chains have fallen and the voices have gone still. What happens after the system breaks, but the scars remain? In Part 9, we explore the fragile boundary between freedom and memory. We meet those rare few who crossed over, slaves who were freed, and who now live not in chains, but in the long, complicated shadow of what those chains once meant. Let's begin with Lucilla. She's 40 now, freed at 32 after 2 decades of faithful service in a wealthy Roman home. The official reason, excellent loyalty and child rearing. The real reason? Her mistress died and the new wife wanted fresh faces. So Lucilla was manumitted, given a modest stipend, a certificate, even a set of decent clothes. On paper, she was no longer property. In her bones, it wasn't that simple. She now rents a small room in a tenement building near the Tiber. It leaks when it rains, the stairs creak, the neighbors whisper. Some call her madam, others still call her servant. Even in freedom, her past sticks to her like smoke on a wool tunic. She walks carefully. She thanks too often. She lowers her eyes out of habit, not fear. At the market vendors smile, then charge her more. She's a freed woman, after all. Not quite slave, not quite citizen, a liminal creature. Gratitude is expected. Rights are theoretical. She teaches young girls how to clean linens properly, how to greet guests without offense. It's the only trade she knows. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she dreams of speaking without permission, just once. Not yelling, not arguing, just talking freely. But even in dreams, she apologizes afterward. Then there's Servius, a freedman who now owns a bakery. He was once chained to a millstone in that same shop, grinding flour until his hands cracked and his shoulders spasmed from repetition. His master noticed his skill, his speed, his sharp math. When the master died, he left Servius the bakery, with strings attached, of course. Servius had to pay annual dues to the family, had to publicly honor his former master each Saturnalia, had to name his first son after him. Still, he's proud. His bread is good. His staff, half of them freed like him, respect him. When he walks through the market, people know his name, but some whisper it with suspicion. Who does he think he is? He used to be a slave. As if that cancels the yeast. As if flour remembers, Servius keeps records. Not just sales, but names. The names of every man and woman who worked in the shop during his years in chains. Some died, some vanished. One, Titus, ran and was caught. Servius still bakes on the anniversary of Titus's death, not because they were close, but because someone should. Freedom in Rome was often legal before it was real. You could wear the clothes, own the keys, sign the contracts, but respect, belonging, that was sold separately. Freedmen and women weren't permitted to run for office. Their children could, but not them. They were often used as political tools, shown off by former masters as proof of their generosity. Look, a senator might say, at what a good man I am. I freed 3 this year. He wouldn't mention the 40 he didn't. Even the language of manumission was drenched in ego. The slave was said to be given freedom as if it were a favor, a gift, not something stolen and returned in crumbs. And yet, even those crumbs became something powerful. Because once freed, some former slaves began building small businesses, study groups, families. Lucilla has begun teaching one of her neighbor's daughters to read. Slowly, with a broken wax tablet and a patient hand, no one knows. If the girl's father finds out, he might object, but Lucilla teaches anyway. Servius once gave a young runaway a place to sleep. It was dangerous, illegal. If caught, he could lose everything. But he did it, because he remembered what it felt like to be caught without a place to land. The freed weren't saints. Some became cruel, some exploited others. Some, having risen, kicked the ladder away. Rome trained everyone in hierarchy, even its victims. But among them were those who tried to unlearn, to untangle the rope that had once bound them and kept binding long after it fell, to remember and in remembering to act differently. That is the quiet revolution. Not Spartacus on a battlefield, but Lucilla with a wax tablet, Servius with a spare bed. History doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes. So what do we learn here in the soft aftermath? That freedom is not a finish line. It's a process, a rebuilding, a remembering. That dignity once denied takes time to grow back. That even the smallest choice, who to teach, who to feed, who to name, becomes part of the healing. And that healing, like memory, is sacred. So as we drift further from the firelight of the empire, as the shadows grow longer and the night quieter, remember this: the story didn't end when the chains fell. It began. We've come a long way, haven't we? Through kitchens and fields, through mines and markets, through mansions echoing with orders and cellars filled with silence. We've met the enslaved, the freed, the forgotten. We've listened to whispers left behind in stone and dust, in the cracks between scrolls that survived only because someone thought them unimportant. And now at last, we stand here. The edge. The final part of our journey. But before you think this is the end, let's be clear. This isn't where the story stops. This is where you enter it. Because in part 10, we look not at Rome, but at ourselves, the ones who come after, the ones holding the torch, the ones asked to carry forward the names no one else would. It begins with a name you already know: Felix. 2 words scratched into a wall. Felix lived, that's it. No dates, no context, no family tree or epic poems or lists of deeds. Just that stubborn declaration: Felix lived. He might have been a stable boy, a baker, a gladiator, a tutor, a thief, a friend. We'll never know. But someone, at some point, cared enough to carve those 2 words into eternity. And in doing so, they performed an act of defiance against the greatest power Rome ever wielded. Not its legions, not its laws, but its ability to erase. Rome was a master of forgetting. It remembered emperors and generals, architects and orators, but the millions who hauled the stones, sharpened the pens, poured the wine. Forgotten. They were the scaffolding, removed once the marble was in place. But someone remembered Felix, and so do we. And in remembering, we change the game. You see, this whole series, this whole quiet nighttime expedition through Rome's underbelly, it hasn't just been about history. It's been about something far more dangerous: empathy. Because once you've seen Selena preparing herbs with trembling fingers, once you've followed Drusus limping across a dry field, shoulders raw, once you've watched Leander bite his tongue while his master's son butchers philosophy, you can't go back. Not to silence, not to neutrality, not to history as a list of kings and conquests with no mention of who bled beneath their thrones. So what do we do with that? We begin, as Felix did, with memory. We say the names. We tell the stories. We resist the urge to let only the loud and powerful fill the books. Because here's the truth. You don't need a monument to be remembered. You need someone who refuses to forget. And tonight, that someone is you. You, sitting with your screen glowing softly in the dark. You, with your blanket pulled up, your fan humming in the background. You wondering why your chest feels heavier than usual, like you've picked something up and you're not quite sure what it is yet. It's this, the weight of untold stories. And here's the twist. It doesn't crush you, it strengthens you. Because when you remember Marcus drawing lions on cellar walls, or Unia reading poetry by stolen lamplight, or Tavia humming lullabies to children who will never call her mother, you don't just preserve their past, you reclaim your own humanity. We live in a world that moves fast, that forgets fast, that commodifies labor, silences pain, sanitizes history. But memory, true, raw, stubborn memory, is resistance. And storytelling, that's how we do it. That's why we told you about Selena, not just to break your heart, but to awaken it. That's why we followed Leander, not because he was famous, but because he was human. That's why we remembered Flavia and Servius and Lucilla, not because they were exceptional, but because they were exactly who history forgets first. And now, you carry them. So what happens next? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe you sleep. Maybe tomorrow is normal, but maybe, just maybe, you look at the world a little differently. Maybe you notice the workers who clean the streets before dawn. Maybe you paused before brushing past a name in a document, asking who that person really was. Maybe you start carving quiet reminders like Fee lived into your own conversations. You don't need a chisel. Just honesty, curiosity, compassion. The Roman Empire is gone. Its statues chipped, its scrolls faded, its gods silent. But the people who built it, they live on in memory, in story, in resistance, because someone remembered, because you remembered. And that, more than any monument, is what keeps them alive. So tonight, as the screen dims and your breathing slows, take one more moment to say the names again, not aloud, just in your mind. Selena, Drusus, Tavia, Leander, Lyra, Marcus, Flavia, Unia, Lucilla, Servius, Attius, Felix. They lived. Now sleep and let them rest too, not in chains, but in the safety of your memory. Good night, friend. We remember, always. Every empire leaves a footprint, but Rome left something heavier, a weight. Not just on maps or marble or in history books, but in the silent spaces between what was remembered and what was erased. The statues remained, the names of generals, emperors, conquerors, they endured. But the people who built the temples, who paved the roads, who carried the empire on their backs, they vanished, unless someone remembered them. And now we do. Welcome to part 11. This isn't another tale of a slave, not a forgotten laborer in a villa, not a tired field hand collapsing under the sun. This is something quieter, deeper, a reckoning. Tonight, we're not peering into the Roman Empire, we're looking around us, because the story hasn't ended. The story evolved, Rome. Yes, the marble cracked, the gods faded, the banners dropped. But the system didn't die. It simply changed clothes. You can still see it in our world today. In every warehouse where someone packs boxes for 12 hours straight with no bathroom breaks, in every garment sewn for pennies a day, in every field picked clean by hands that history never names. Invisible labor, just like Rome. Selena might be gone, but her silence still exists. In every maid told to smile, but not speak. In every cook whose name doesn't appear on the menu. Leander might not be in his master's study anymore, but his spirit lingers in every brilliant mind forced to hide its light to survive. And Drusus? You know him. He's the man who does the hard job no one wants. The one people pass on the street without seeing. Still walking, still carrying. We've come far since the empire fell. But the blueprint survived. And that's why this story matters. Not as nostalgia, not as horror, but as warning. Empires don't just fall. They echo. You may not hear Latin in the streets anymore, but the rhythm of domination, the machinery of forgetting, the casual normalization of exploitation, it's all still there, just rebranded, sanitized, modernized. And here's the hard part. Most people never notice. That's how it survives, in the silence, in the comfort of not asking who made your coffee, who cleaned your office after dark, who picked your fruit, who assembled your phone. That comfort is inherited, and it comes at a cost. Rome knew this. It bet on it. That no one would care who laid the bricks as long as the bathhouse stayed warm. But we care. You care. That's why you're here. 11 parts in, heart heavier, eyes wider. Not because this is entertainment, but because it's truth. And truth, when it settles into the soul, does not let go. So what do we do now? What do we do after hearing the cries of Selena in the kitchen, the whispers of Unia teaching by candlelight, the etched defiance of Marcus drawing lions on the walls? We remember, not just the names, but the lessons, that systems are built to forget people, but people, when they remember, can change systems. Felix scratched his name into a wall. Felix lived. 2 words, that's all. But those 2 words lasted longer than the empire itself, longer than the gold, longer than the senators. Why? Because someone, maybe Felix himself, maybe a friend, refused to let him disappear. And now you won't either, because you've met him, and Leander, and Flavia, and Tavia, and Attius and Cassius and Servius and Lucilla, and you felt them. And once you feel someone truly feel them, you cannot unfeel. That's the gift. That's the burden. You carry them now. And carrying them doesn't mean grand gestures. It doesn't mean marching or protesting or rewriting laws overnight. Sometimes it means simply seeing the person behind the register, the worker cleaning at midnight, the name at the bottom of the email chain, the delivery driver at your door. Noticing is where remembering begins. Empathy, after all, is a form of memory, and memory is power. Rome's greatest weapon wasn't its army. It was its ability to define who mattered. Tonight, you've broken that. You've said they all mattered. Even the ones history didn't write down, especially them. So now, as you lie in bed, screen dimming, breath slowing, one last thought, you are the archive now. You are the whisper in the dark. You are the one who says, they lived. I know, I was there, because you were. Every step, every name, every sorrow and soft rebellion, you were there, and they thank you. Not in words, but in presence. In that feeling you can't quite shake, that mix of grief and clarity, that quiet revolution happening inside your chest. Let it stay. Let it grow. Let it guide how you see the world tomorrow. And if you ever doubt whether stories make a difference, remember this. An empire fell, but Felix lived. Good night, we remember, and we begin again. Let's say, just for a moment, that history isn't a timeline. It's a circle. Not a clean, perfect loop, but a spiral. One that turns and turns over and over, dragging the past into the present like a tide that never quite recedes. Tonight in part 12, we walk that spiral one more time, not to revisit Rome, but to see what rose from its ashes. Because when an empire dies, it doesn't disappear, it disperses. It becomes part of the air we breathe. And whether we like it or not, we are all breathing Rome. Let's begin not in the marble halls of the Senate or the heat of a Roman vineyard, but in your city, wherever you are. London, Cairo, Mumbai, Atlanta, Sydney, the spiral reaches you. That bank downtown, its architecture mimics Roman temples. That court system, its roots trace back to Roman law. That phrase you heard today, quid pro quo, Latin, straight from the mouths of people who wore togas and traded people like grain. But it's not just language and stone that remain, it's mindset. And tonight we're going to name it. Let's call it the hierarchy of worth. It's the quiet belief embedded deep in systems and structures that some lives are worth more than others, that some people are meant to serve and some are meant to be served. Rome didn't invent that idea, but it perfected it. And even as it burned, the idea survived. Think about it. What is slavery, if not the most brutal version of a hierarchy? A system where freedom, choice, and dignity are stripped from one human and handed to another. Rome turned that into policy, into infrastructure, into business as usual. And we, centuries later, are still unlearning it, still deciding every day whether we will replicate the spiral or resist it. Because while chattel slavery may be illegal in much of the world today, the logic behind it, that idea that some people can be used up and discarded, still here. You can see it in the sweatshops, in the migrant camps, in the prisons, in the homes where domestic workers sleep beside the washing machine and are told to be grateful. Different chains, same empire. But here's where the spiral breaks, or tries to. You sitting here, listening. You who met Selena and Leander and Marcus. You who stayed for 12 parts, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Because something in their stories lit a fire you didn't expect. Maybe it was the way Tavia hummed songs to children who would forget her. Maybe it was Marcus drawing lions on dusty walls just to remind himself he existed. Maybe it was Felix, just a name, just a breath, but enough. And that's the twist Rome didn't plan for. That memory is viral, it spreads. You remember them, and you tell someone, you speak their names, you question the systems around you. You change how you treat the person who bags your groceries or watches your children or wipes the floors at 3 a.m. And suddenly, the spiral falters. Because no empire can survive too much empathy. Empathy demands visibility, and visibility destroys hierarchies. This is why memory matters. Not for nostalgia, not for guilt, but for disruption. Rome hoped you wouldn't look behind the curtain, that you'd admire the Colosseums and forget who mixed the mortar, but you looked, you saw, and more importantly, you felt. So what now? What happens after 12 nights of ghost stories and aching truths? You rest, you breathe, you carry it. Not as a burden, but as a compass. You don't have to fix the world alone, but you can notice it. You can ask the question Rome never did: who made this and at what cost? Ask it at the store, at work, at school, at dinner. Ask it when the headlines go quiet. Ask it when no one else is. Because remembering the enslaved of Rome isn't just about the past. It's about choosing to see the present clearly. Every Selena still wiping tables, every Drusus still breaking their back for someone else's profit, every Leander still solving problems for people who won't speak their name. The names are different, the spiral is not, but spirals can be broken. Not with swords, but with stories, with memory, with you. So as we close this part of the journey, there's one last truth to leave with. They lived, they were here, and because of you, they are again. So tonight, as you pull your blanket up, as the fan hums low, as the dark deepens into something soft, let that spiral slow, let that weight settle, and let the silence be full of names. Tavia, Drusus, Flavia, Selena, Leander, Cassius, Unia, Lucilla, Servius, Lyris, Felix. You carry them now. You are the archive, you're the whisper passed from one night to the next, down the torch lit in a quiet room, the heartbeat of memory outlasting empire. Sleep well. Tomorrow we remember again. Sometimes remembering feels like a soft light in a dark room. Other times it feels like a burden you didn't ask to carry. But tonight, in part 13, it becomes something else entirely. A bridge, a path between past and present, a line connecting Rome's forgotten millions to the world we live in now. Not with shame, not with guilt, but with clarity. Let's start with something simple. The world is still built on labor. We've changed the tools, we've updated the titles. But behind every screen, every delivery, every clean floor is a person. And behind every person is a story. Rome didn't want you to see that. Not really. That's why it built marble facades. Smooth, flawless, indifferent. It made grandeur look effortless. It hid the hands behind the stone. But you've spent 12 nights breaking that illusion. You've seen the hands. You've felt the stories. And now you can't unsee them. You can't see a house without wondering who cleaned it. You can't eat a meal without wondering who picked the food. You can't wear a shirt without asking who paid the price for this comfort. That's the gift and the curse of awareness. And tonight, we lean into it. Because part 13 isn't just about Rome anymore. It's about you, about us, about the world we're building every day with our choices, our stories, our silence, or our refusal to be silent. Let's walk through a scene together. It's modern, present day. A woman wakes before the sun. She wraps a scarf around her head. Her shoes are worn thin. She takes a bus, then a train, then walks 4 blocks to a building where she cleans floors for people who don't know her name. She has children. She sings to them when she gets home, tired but soft. She's never heard of Flavia. But Flavia's story is hers. In another country, a man spends 10 hours in a warehouse, lifting packages so quickly he no longer notices the pain in his wrists. He's fast, too fast, because if he slows, he'll lose his spot. Someone else will replace him. Cheap, eager, disposable. He's never heard of Drusus, but Drusus's story is his. A teenage girl folds shirts in a boutique. She's told to smile, always smile. And she does, while men twice her age joke about discounts, while her supervisor watches her too long, while her pay slips in cents. She's never heard of Selena, but Selena's story is hers. And what about you? You're not in a villa. You're not a senator, but in your hands, in your reach, is more power than most emperors had. The power to choose, to ask, to remember, to care. That is not a small thing. Rome taught its citizens to look away, to accept that slaves would always be there, that someone else's suffering was just the cost of comfort. Sound familiar? You've seen it. In headlines, in factories, in service lines, on farms, and ships and screens. Modern, efficient, polished. But behind every smooth transaction is a beating heart. And remembering that breaks the system. Because systems of exploitation rely on one thing above all: disconnection. From story, from name, from consequence. But once you reconnect the pieces, once you remember that every object, every service, every luxury is tied to a human, you become impossible to ignore. That's what makes you dangerous now. Not loud, not angry, aware. And awareness, like fire, spreads. You saw Leander bent over scrolls he could never claim. You saw Lucilla washing the linens of people who pitied her but never freed her. You saw Servius baking bread in a shop that used to own him. And now you walk into your own world with their memory in your pocket. You tip differently. You greet differently. You wonder differently. Because you know what most people don't, that history isn't past, it's present. It's layered into every corner of our lives, quiet, waiting, watching to see if we'll notice. And you did. You noticed. So what now? What do you do with this new sight? You begin where all revolutions begin, with dignity. For yourself, for others, for the people whose names you'll never know, but whose labor holds your world together. You start to speak up when no one else will. You start to ask questions that make people uncomfortable. You start to use your story not to center yourself, but to lift others. And slowly, quietly, the spiral breaks. Rome's legacy fractures, and something new grows in its place. Something more human, more honest, more real. It won't be perfect, but it will be true. And that truth, that is your legacy now. Not gold, not conquest, not comfort, clarity. So tonight, as we close this part, not the end, but a threshold, take one last look over your shoulder. The ghosts are watching, not haunting, hoping you'll carry them a little further, hoping you'll tell someone, hoping you'll remember. So say their names once more. Whisper them if you must. Flavia, Selena, Drusus, Leander, Cassius, Lucilla, Marcus, Felix. They lived, they mattered, they still do. And now, so do you, because you saw them, because you stayed, because you chose to listen when the Empire wanted you to forget. Sleep well, friend. The fire's not out. You're just carrying it forward. Let's sit here a little longer, just a bit. You've stayed for 13 parts. You've heard names whispered across centuries. You've followed footsteps down stone corridors, into fields, through kitchens, under stars. You've carried the weight of silence, then cracked it open. And now in part 14, we do something rare. We pause. Because endings are too often rushed, tied in bows, smoothed over like nothing ever hurt. But not here. Tonight we take our time. We don't begin with a new name or a dramatic twist. We begin with you. You who kept listening. You who learned to see the world differently. You who sat with ghosts and called them people. That's no small thing. Empires fear memory. They fear it more than rebellion, more than fire. Because fire burns once. Memory lingers, and you linger. You've become the soft resistance Rome never counted on, not in the streets, but in the heart. You see, the true end of slavery isn't freedom. It's recognition. It's when a life once counted as property becomes part of history, not as a number, not as an object, but as a person. And thanks to you, they are. Let's return to Felix one last time. Felix lived. 2 words, that's all. But we've said them now, dozens, hundreds, thousands of times, each whisper another thread weaving him back into the world. You've done that. Not scholars, not monuments, you. And if that seems small, think again. Every system built on dehumanization begins with a single idea. This person does not matter. And every act of memory pushes back. They did. They did. They still do. You've remembered so many now. Selena and her quiet herbal knowledge. Leander and his mind, sharper than his chains. Drusus and his limp, his endurance. Lucilla and her silence, layered with pride. Servius and his bread, risen from suffering. Eunia, who taught with candlelight and whispers. Tavia, whose lullabies stitched tenderness into brutality. Marcus, drawing lions on cellar walls. And Felix, who, despite it all, lived. These are not just stories, they are guides. They've shown us what to notice, what to ask, what to carry forward. Because if remembering is the first act, caring is the second. And you've done both. So let's ask one final time, what does it all mean? What's the point of knowing so much sorrow? Why sit through 14 parts about people who suffered and labored and vanished? Because now they haven't. Now, when you walk through your city, their shadows walk with you. Not to haunt, but to nudge. They'll be there when you see a janitor and smile, truly smile. They'll be there when you ask someone's name and remember it. They'll be there when you pause before clicking buy now and wonder, who packed this? They'll be there when your child asks, why is that person doing that job? And you answer truthfully, lovingly. They'll be there when someone says, that's just how it's always been, and you quietly, firmly say, but it doesn't have to be. That's the gift of this story. Not just knowledge, but sight. And that sight, that stubborn insistence on seeing the invisible, is the greatest threat to any empire built on silence. Rome thought it had the final word. It didn't. You do. Your breath, your voice, your memory. That is the afterlife they never expected. That is the reckoning. So tonight, as we close the curtain, we don't say goodbye, we say continue. Continue asking, continue feeling, continue remembering. Because the fire doesn't end here, it just moves to new hands, your hands. So carry it, gently, proudly. And if ever you forget, if the world rushes too fast and the stories slip to the edges, come back, re-listen, re-remember, because they'll be waiting, and they will still whisper, I was here, you saw me, thank you. Good night, keeper of stories. You didn't just hear history, you changed it. The fire hasn't gone out. You thought maybe it would, after 14 parts, after so many names, so much silence, so much seeing, but here you are, still awake, still listening, still remembering. So tonight in part 15, we don't look backward, not exactly. We look at the world you're in now, a world built on old bones, echoing with old logic, still pretending that labor is clean and history is done. It's not, and you know that now. So let's talk about the most dangerous thing you've done over these past nights. You've felt. That's rare. Not sympathy, not shock, empathy. True, aching, unpolished empathy. The kind that makes your chest tighten when you see the shape of someone else's grief, even if their name was lost centuries ago. That is a revolutionary act, not because it changes the past, but because it refuses to accept the future as inevitable. Let's walk a little further into that. Imagine a city, not ancient, yours. Now imagine it without the people we've talked about. No cleaners, no night shift workers, no nannies or caretakers or janitors or drivers or farmhands or backroom cooks, no hands to carry, lift, scrub, tend. What's left? Nothing works. The city stops, the illusion cracks. Because the truth is, and always has been, that the world only spins because of people whose names rarely make the credits. Rome knew this. So did every empire after. And instead of honoring those people, the system hid them, covered them with marble, gave the credit to statues, wrote the story around generals and gods in gold, and erased the rest. Until now. Because you sat here, part after part, refusing the erasure. You've reclaimed the names, you've reopened the wounds, and you've asked over and over, what does this mean for now? Let's answer that. It means that every time you pause, every time you see someone, really see them. You are breaking a centuries-old tradition of looking away. When you tip the delivery driver, not just out of politeness, but because you see them as part of a long, invisible lineage. When you thank the cleaner like they're royalty, because for a brief moment they are. When you hear someone's accent and don't flinch, don't ask where they're really from, but instead think, who else had to carry someone else's world? That's you, remembering. That's you, interrupting empire. It's not always loud, it's not always seen, but it matters. Because systems don't collapse from the top down, they dissolve from the inside, from stories, from glances, from tiny, stubborn acts of humanity that refuse to forget. You've been practicing that, and now you're dangerous because you know what the past really was, and because of that, you can see what the present still is. You can tell when a room feels too polished, like someone was erased to make it that clean. You can sense the ghosts behind every system that says, this is just how it is. You can call it out, even if you don't say a word, even if all you do is see, because seeing is where justice starts, and justice, like memory, is patient. So what happens now? Maybe you go back to your life, maybe nothing looks different on the surface, but something's shifted. You know it. Your silence carries more weight, your gaze carries more depth, your stories carry more care. And that's the legacy, not of Rome, of you. Because when you carry someone else's memory, you don't just keep them alive, you evolve them. You become part of something older and better than empire. You become kin to Selena, still humming by the fire, to Drusus, still limping with dignity, to Leander, still reading in the dark, to Lucilla, still waiting to be heard. You're one of them now. A quiet witness, a keeper of the thread. So tonight, as the lights dim and the world softens around you, remember this. This story didn't need to be told. History didn't demand it. No textbook required it. But you did. Something in you reached out through time and said, who were they? And now you know. And now you carry them. So carry them well, with care, with pride. And when someone asks why you care so much about people who died 2,000 years ago, tell them, because no one else did. Because I couldn't sleep through the silence anymore, because even forgotten lives deserve a witness, because they lived. Good night, Firekeeper. You're still glowing, you're still listening, and you're not alone. They say every journey changes the traveler. After 16 nights walking through forgotten histories and whispered names, I want to ask, who have you become? Tonight in part 16, we don't add new characters. We don't unearth untouched lives. We reflect, not to pat ourselves on the back, but to ask, what's different now? Because stories aren't just stories, they are seeds, and seeds need space to grow. Steady light, patient roots, quiet time. You've planted some powerful seeds these past nights. Now let them take root. Let's begin with breathing. Close your eyes for a moment, take in a long, slow breath. Hold it, release. That's you, alive. A living testament against erasure. Feel the hum of life inside you, your heart, your chest, your steady pulse. That pulse is connected to theirs. You've learned their names, you've carried them inside you, you've breathed them into the world. That's deeper than memory, it's communion. So, how does that change how you live? It starts like this, noticing. Every day, 5 a.m., coffee shop in the city, a barista wiping tables alone, their feet aching, tattooed hands, tired smile. They are Selena. You don't need to do much, just see them, smile, pause. Ask how their day is, not because you're scoring points, but because you're practicing presence. Presence breaks the spiral. Listening, when someone tells you about their shift, their exhaustion, their bill they're behind on, their worry about tomorrow. Listen, as if their words hold centuries, because they do. That's Tavia's lullabies, that's Drusus's stolen water break. Listening heals. Naming. Names matter. When you ask and learn someone's first name, hi, I'm Maria, I'm Carlos, I'm Jay, you're not just being polite, you're declaring humanity. You are giving resistance a face. That's Leander looking up from scrolls, trying to be seen. Every time you remember a name, someone else's, you are building human bridges. But here's where we get careful. Memory carries risk, because knowing the story can make you feel guilty, powerless, angry, exhausted. So, what do you do with it? You don't have to change the world in one breath. You just walk differently. Small choices. In grocery stores, choose produce that's fair trade. In your phone bills, question the company's labor practices. In your closet, consider who stitched that shirt. In your words, speak up when someone is called just a cleaner or just a delivery guy. In your family, teach the next generation that everyone contributes, not just the ones on stage or in glossy magazines, because each of those moments is a seed planted. Seeds take time. And Rome's empire fell only because people remembered, because Christians, barbarians, storytellers refused to let the old world stay silent. You're part of that same tide. But I want to speak to your weariness. Maybe some nights you lie awake and think, is it worth it? Does it help? Yes, every seed matters. You don't see the oak tree grow, but some days you'll wake in a forest. Even a tiny spark can start a wildfire. One conversation, one smile, one question, one memory shared at the right time. One time you say someone mattered. That could ripple across industries, across cities. It can. You love? Don't shrink from that word. Let your empathy be your compass. It's okay to be tender. It's okay to carry grief. Let it guide you, not bury you. Now let's whisper the names one last time. Selena, Drusus, Leander, Tavia, Lucilla, Servius, Unia, Marcus, Lyra, Felix. They mattered. They were people, and so are you. But here's the beautiful paradox. In carrying them, you became more yourself, because they remind you what it means to be human, to stand, to breathe, to see. So tonight, as you hold this moment, let it settle. Let silence surround you like a cloak, and know this: your memory is not just for them, it's for the world they built and the world you belong to. Your choice matters, your breath matters, your empathy matters. They did not live in vain, you did not listen in vain, and this world, it can remember. It will, because of you. Good night, caretaker of souls. You carry the spark, your journey continues tomorrow, and always onwards. You made it, 17 parts, countless names, hundreds of years, and here you are, still breathing, still remembering, still present. So what now? What happens when the story ends, but the echo stays? Tonight, in part 17, we do what Rome never expected anyone to do. We linger, we resist the urge to move on, we sit with the silence, we let it speak, because that's where truth lives, not in the noise, not in the spectacle, but in what comes after. Let's begin here, with stillness. No scroll, no soundtrack, no grand declarations, just a soft human fact. You remember. That makes you part of something bigger than history, bigger than narrative, bigger than empire. You are part of a sacred chain of memory, and chains, when held with care, can become links of protection, not oppression. Let's think about what you've carried. You've walked beside Selena in the kitchens, her hands chapped, her voice low. You've seen Leander squint over worn parchment, knowing the knowledge he held would never wear his name. You've stood with Lucilla in doorways no one invited her through, watched Marcus etch animals into stone, stubbornly refusing to vanish. You've mourned Felix, not because you knew him, but because you felt him. You've grown different, and not just different in theory. You feel the world now. The click of your shoes on a polished floor reminds you that someone cleaned it. A cheap price tag whispers that someone paid more than money. A fast delivery brings a question. Who lost sleep for this speed? This sensitivity, it's not weakness. It's armor. It protects you from apathy, from numbness, from becoming what the Empire always wanted, indifferent. Because indifference was Rome's most powerful tool, more than soldiers, more than gold, more than marble. Indifference is what allowed millions to disappear, without graves, without names, without even a story. But not anymore. Not as long as you carry them. And that's why tonight's part doesn't end the story. It changes your role in it. You are no longer the listener. You are the storyteller now, the keeper of light. The person who, in conversations, at dinner tables, in classrooms, on trains, can quietly say, "Do you know who built that? Do you ever wonder who was there, but left out? Have you heard of Felix?" You don't need a script. You don't need a platform. You need presence. You need truth. Because here's what no empire ever survives: people who remember, people who question, people who care. It sounds too gentle to work, but that's what makes it revolutionary. Gentleness isn't passive. Gentleness persists. Gentleness outlasts the fire. Gentleness buries empire under flowers. So what does it mean to live with memory? It means you walk through the world like someone holding a fragile vase. You're careful with people. You're aware of weight, you notice the cracks, and when you find someone breaking, you stay. That's what Selena never had. That's what Leander never knew. Someone who stayed. Now you are that someone. Not to fix, not to lead, but to be a quiet witness, a kind presence, a gentle weight. It builds a new world, one where the past isn't erased, one where labor is seen, one where stories aren't told only by the powerful. That's the story you tell now. And if ever you forget why it matters, if ever you feel the pull to look away, remember this: they're still watching, not haunting, not demanding, just waiting for you to tell it again, to whisper the name, to plant the seed, to hold the story. Felix, Lucilla, Tavia, Marcus, Selena, Drusus, Leander, Cassius, Iunia, Lyra, Servius, they are no longer forgotten because of you. And now it's your turn to be remembered. For your breath, your tenderness, your willingness to sit in the dark and not flinch. So sleep now, gentle soul, sleep knowing the fire is safe. It burns quietly in you until someone else comes and you pass it forward, not with a bang, but with a name, a whisper, a memory, a light. Good night, friend. You are the ending they deserved. You are the beginning someone else needs. You made it. 17 parts, countless names, hundreds of years. And here you are, still breathing, still remembering, still present. So what now? What happens when the story ends, but the echo stays? Tonight, in part 17, we do what Rome never expected anyone to do. We linger. We resist the urge to move on. We sit with the silence. We let it speak. Because that's where truth lives. Not in the noise, not in the spectacle, but in what comes after. Let's begin here, with stillness. No scroll, no soundtrack, no grand declarations, just a soft human fact. You remember. That makes you part of something bigger than history, bigger than narrative, bigger than empire. You are part of a sacred chain of memory. And chains, when held with care, can become links of protection, not oppression. Let's think about what you've carried. You've walked beside Selena in the kitchens, her hands chapped, her voice low. You've seen Leander squint over worn parchment, knowing the knowledge he held would never wear his name. You've stood with Lucilla in doorways no one invited her through, watched Marcus etch animals into stone, stubbornly refusing to vanish. You've mourned Felix, not because you knew him, but because you felt him. You've grown different, and not just different in theory. You feel the world now. The click of your shoes on a polished floor reminds you that someone cleaned it. A cheap price tag whispers that someone paid more than money. A fast delivery brings a question. Who lost sleep for this speed? This sensitivity, it's not weakness, it's armor. It protects you from apathy, from numbness, from becoming what the Empire always wanted, indifferent. Because indifference was Rome's most powerful tool, more than soldiers, more than gold, more than marble. Indifference is what allowed millions to disappear, without graves, without names, without even a story. But not anymore. Not as long as you carry them. And that's why tonight's part doesn't end the story. It changes your role in it. You are no longer the listener. You are the storyteller now, the keeper of light, the person who, in conversations at dinner tables, in classrooms, on trains, can quietly say, "Do you know who built that? Do you ever wonder who was there, but left out? Have you heard of Felix?" You don't need a script. You don't need a platform. You need presence. You need truth. Because here's what no empire ever survives. People who remember, people who question, people who care. It sounds too gentle to work, but that's what makes it revolutionary. Gentleness isn't passive. Gentleness persists. Gentleness outlasts the fire. Gentleness buries empire under flowers. So what does it mean to live with memory? It means you walk through the world like someone holding a fragile vase. You're careful with people. You're aware of weight. You notice the cracks, and when you find someone breaking, you stay. That's what Selena never had. That's what Leander never knew. Someone who stayed. Now you are that someone. Not to fix, not to lead, but to be a quiet witness, a kind presence, a gentle weight. And that weight, it builds a new world. One where the past isn't erased. One where labor is seen. One where stories aren't told only by the powerful. That's the story you tell now. And if ever you forget why it matters, if ever you feel the pull to look away, remember this. They're still watching, not haunting, not demanding, just waiting for you to tell it again, to whisper the name, to plant the seed, to hold the story. Felix, Lucilla, Tavia, Marcus, Selena, Drusus, Leander, Cassius, Iunia, Lyra, Servius. They are no longer forgotten because of you. And now it's your turn to be remembered. For your breath, your tenderness, your willingness to sit in the dark and not flinch. So sleep now, gentle soul. Sleep knowing the fire is safe. It burns quietly in you until someone else comes and you pass it forward, not with a bang, but with a name, a whisper, a memory, a light. Good night, friend. You are the ending they deserved. You are the beginning someone else needs. You made it. 17 parts, countless names, hundreds of years. And here you are, still breathing, still remembering, still present. So what now? What happens when the story ends, but the echo stays? Tonight in part 17, we do what Rome never expected anyone to do. We linger. We resist the urge to move on. We sit with the silence. We let it speak, because that's where truth lives. Not in the noise, not in the spectacle, but in what comes after. Let's begin here with stillness. No scroll, no soundtrack, no grand declarations. Just a soft human fact. You remember. That makes you part of something bigger than history, bigger than narrative, bigger than empire. You are part of a sacred chain of memory, and chains, when held with care, can become links of protection, not oppression. Let's think about what you've carried. You've walked beside Selena in the kitchens, her hands chapped, her voice low. You've seen Leander squint over worn parchment, knowing the knowledge he held would never wear his name. You've stood with Lucilla in doorways no one invited her through, watched Marcus etch animals into stone, stubbornly refusing to vanish. You've mourned Felix, not because you knew him, but because you felt him. You've grown different, and not just different in theory. You feel the world now. The click of your shoes on a polished floor reminds you that someone cleaned it. A cheap price tag whispers that someone paid more than money. A fast delivery brings a question. Who lost sleep for this speed? This sensitivity, it's not weakness, it's armor. It protects you from apathy, from numbness, from becoming what the Empire always wanted, indifferent. Because indifference was Rome's most powerful tool. More than soldiers, more than gold, more than marble. Indifference is what allowed millions to disappear, without graves, without names, without even a story. But not anymore. Not as long as you carry them, and that's why tonight's part doesn't end the story. It changes your role in it. You are no longer the listener. You are the storyteller now, the keeper of light, the person who, in conversations, at dinner tables, in classrooms, on trains, can quietly say, "Do you know who built that? Do you ever wonder who was there but left out? Have you heard of Felix?" You don't need a script. You don't need a platform. You need presence. You need truth. Because here's what no empire ever survives. People who remember. People who question. People who care. It sounds too gentle to work, but that's what makes it revolutionary. Gentleness isn't passive. Gentleness persists. Gentleness outlasts the fire. Gentleness buries empire under flowers. So what does it mean to live with memory? It means you walk through the world like someone holding a fragile vase. You're careful with people. You're aware of weight. You notice the cracks, and when you find someone breaking, you stay. That's what Selena never had. That's what Leander never knew. Someone who stayed. Now you are that someone. Not to fix, not to lead, but to be a quiet witness, a kind presence, a gentle weight. And that weight, it builds a new world, one where the past isn't erased, one where labor is seen, one where stories aren't told only by the powerful. That's the story you tell now. And if ever you forget why it matters, if ever you feel the pull to look away, remember this, they're still watching, not haunting, not demanding, just waiting for you to tell it again, to whisper the name, to plant the seed, to hold the story. Felix, Lucilla, Tevia, Marcus, Selena, Drusus, Leander, Cassius, Unia, Lyra, Servius, they are no longer forgotten because of you. And now it's your turn to be remembered for your breath, your tenderness, your willingness to sit in the dark and not flinch. So sleep now, gentle soul. Sleep knowing the fire is safe. It burns quietly in you until someone else comes and you pass it forward, not with a bang, but with a name, a whisper, a memory, a light. Good night, friend. You are the ending they deserved. You are the beginning someone else needs. You are what came after Rome and refused to forget. You didn't come this far to stop now. 20 nights, 20 fires, 20 echoes answered with care. And now, part 21. We've gone past the story's spine, past names and places, past what happened. Now we are in the marrow, because this final stretch isn't about what they lived through. It's about what you live with, what you carry, what you build. You know by now, memory is not static. It doesn't sit in the background like an old painting. Memory moves. It whispers. It shapes how you walk, how you speak, how you notice. And now that you remember the invisible labor of empire, now that you've mourned those who were never mourned, something in you is different. You're not just remembering their stories, you're building a different world with them in mind. Let's talk about that world. Not a utopia, not a fantasy, a better now. A world where comfort doesn't require blindness. where success isn't measured by what you extract from others, but by what you lift in them. A world where empathy isn't a buzzword, it's a muscle, trained, tested, trusted. That's what this story has done to you. It's strengthened your empathy, and that matters because empathy changes rooms. When someone speaks and you actually hear them, when someone cries and you don't try to fix it, you just stay. When someone is ignored and you step in, not with answers, but with acknowledgement. That's what Rome never made space for. Empathy. It couldn't. Because empathy disrupts hierarchy. It insists that every voice has value, even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones. So what does an empathic life look like now? Let's walk through it. You enter a workplace, you see the receptionist before the manager, you greet the janitor like they run the place, because without them, it doesn't run at all. You ask someone, "How are you?" And mean it enough to wait for the real answer. You write an email and ask, "Whose time am I about to demand?" You see a cheap product and think, "Who paid the real price for this?" These questions don't slow you down, they make you conscious. Because you don't want to be part of an empire that forgets again. You want to be part of a society that remembers on purpose. And that changes how you consume, how you vote, how you parent, how you love. Because love, too, is a form of witness. And every time you love the ones the world ignores, you reverse the spiral, you rebuild the center, you give voice to the margins. And one day, years from now, someone will ask, "How did you become this way?" And you'll say, "I listened. I remembered a woman named Selena who worked through pain. I carried the name of a man named Felix who was just a name on a wall, but not anymore. I lit a fire for a scholar named Leander whose brilliance was buried too soon." And they'll ask, "Were they your ancestors?" And you'll say, "Yes, not by blood, but by burden, and by the love that came after." That's what you've done. You've chosen lineage over luxury, memory over myth, truth over ease, and now you live differently. Now you are different. And it shows in how you think, in how you pause, in how you bother to care when everyone else shrugs. So tonight, in part 21, let's do something we've never done before. Let's write your name down. Yes, you, the listener, the firekeeper, the last witness of the long forgotten. You who chose empathy over entertainment. You who stayed. You who let the names change you. Let's write your name on the wall, not for glory, not for fame, but for continuity, so that one day someone else might remember you the way you remembered them, as a person who cared, as a person who carried the story when no one else would, as a person who knew that Rome was never just marble and armies, it was sweat and grief and survival, and someone had to tell the truth about it. You did. So this is your line in the history of resistance. You mattered, and you matter still. So sleep now. Rest as one who's worked a sacred shift. The ancestors know your name. The future thanks you in advance. And tonight, in this gentle pause between parts, I do too. Good night, builder of the next world. You are remembered, and that is the beginning. You didn't come this far to stop now. 20 nights, 20 fires, 20 echoes answered with care. And now, part 21. We've gone past the story's spine, past names and places, past what happened. Now we are in the marrow, because this final stretch isn't about what they lived through. It's about what you live with, what you carry, what you build. You know by now, memory is not static. It doesn't sit in the background like an old painting. Memory moves, it whispers. It shapes how you walk, how you speak, how you notice. And now that you remember the invisible labor of empire, now that you've mourned those who were never mourned, something in you is different. You're not just remembering their stories, you're building a different world with them in mind. Let's talk about that world. Not a utopia, not a fantasy, a better now. A world where comfort doesn't require blindness. Where success isn't measured by what you extract from others, but by what you lift in them. A world where empathy isn't a buzzword, it's a muscle, trained, tested, trusted. That's what this story has done to you. It's strengthened your empathy, and that matters. Because empathy changes rooms. When someone speaks, and you actually hear them. When someone cries, and you don't try to fix it. You just stay. when someone is ignored and you step in, not with answers, but with acknowledgement. That's what Rome never made space for. Empathy. It couldn't, because empathy disrupts hierarchy. It insists that every voice has value, even the quiet ones, especially the quiet ones. So what does an empathic life look like now? Let's walk through it. You enter a workplace, you see the receptionist before the manager, you greet the janitor like they run the place, because without them, it doesn't run at all. You ask someone, "How are you?" and mean it enough to wait for the real answer. You write an email and ask, "Whose time am I about to demand?" You see a cheap product and think, "Who paid the real price for this?" These questions don't slow you down. They make you conscious, because you don't want to be part of an empire that forgets again. You want to be part of a society that remembers on purpose, and that changes how you consume, how you vote, how you parent, how you love. Because love, too, is a form of witness. And every time you love the ones the world ignores, you reverse the spiral, you rebuild the center, you give voice to the margins. And one day, years from now, someone will ask, "How did you become this way?" And you'll say, "I listened." I remembered a woman named Selena who worked through pain. I carried the name of a man named Felix who was just a name on a wall, but not anymore. I lit a fire for a scholar named Leander whose brilliance was buried too soon. And they'll ask, "Were they your ancestors?" And you'll say, "Yes, not by blood, but by burden and by the love that came after." That's what you've done. You've chosen lineage over luxury, memory over myth, truth over ease. And now you live differently. Now you are different, and it shows in how you thank, in how you pause, in how you bother to care when everyone else shrugs. So tonight, in part 21, let's do something we've never done before. Let's write your name down. Yes, you, the listener, the firekeeper, the last witness of the long forgotten. You who chose empathy over entertainment. You who let the names change you. Let's write your name on the wall. Not for glory, not for fame, but for continuity, so that one day someone else might remember you the way you remembered them. As a person who cared. As a person who carried the story when no one else would. As a person who knew that Rome was never just marble and armies, it was sweat and grief and survival, and someone had to tell the truth about it. You did. So this is your line in the history of resistance. You mattered, and you matter still. So sleep now. Rest as one who's worked a sacred shift. The ancestors know your name. The future thanks you in advance. And tonight, in this gentle pause between parts, I do too. Good night, builder of the next world. You are remembered. And that is the beginning. 22 nights behind us. 22 steps deeper into the world beneath the world. And now part 23. Not the finale, just the breath before the last. By now, you've likely noticed something strange. You don't remember this story like other stories. You don't recall it, you feel it. It's not just a narrative anymore. It's muscle memory, it's instinct, the pause before judging, the look that lingers a little longer. The question you now ask, every time something feels too easy, too cheap, too perfect, who paid for this ease? You've started seeing the systems behind the systems, and more importantly, you've started seeing the people within them. That's not just awareness, that's transformation. But tonight's part isn't about what you've seen, it's about what comes after, because every transformation must lead to a new way of being. Otherwise, it's just sentiment. And this was never about sentiment. This was about building the bones of a different world, inside your everyday life. So let's talk about the invisible. Again, not ghosts, not slaves, the modern invisible. The people who today, right now, are living stories that will not make the headlines, who will not be statues, who will not be remembered unless someone chooses to remember them. That's your new role. Not just to recall the past, but to witness the present with reverence. That's how we prevent silence from taking root again. That's how we ensure that comfort never becomes cruelty. That's how we honor every person who labored in Rome's shadows and every person who labors in ours. It starts with simple things, but simple is not small. It's speaking to a janitor like they own the building. It's asking someone's name and remembering it. It's noticing who isn't in the room and making space. It's questioning systems that reward speed but punish care. It's refusing to be too busy to be kind, because kindness sustained is resistance, and resistance repeated becomes culture. You are building culture now, quietly, compassionately, and every time you choose empathy over efficiency, you're breaking the spiral, and you're not alone. Others are watching. They may not say it, but they see you pause. They hear the way you speak to the overlooked. They notice the questions you ask, and they begin to ask too. That's how stories spread, not with billboards, with behavior. So tonight, in this second to last chapter, let's make a promise. Not to the dead, to the living, to the tired delivery driver who hasn't eaten, to the factory worker whose name we'll never know, to the elder in the corner of the care home, alone but still humming, to the undocumented cook who makes your favorite dish and disappears before the credits roll. Let's promise, we see you. We are learning to see you faster, clearer, deeper, and we are building a world where no one will need to shout just to be heard. That's what this story has always been about. Not empire, not tragedy, but sight. True, ethical, embodied sight. And now that you've learned it, you'll never walk blind again, even if you forget the names, even if you miss a few steps, even if the world tries to pull you back into numbness. Something inside you will always remember how it felt to care this deeply. And that feeling, that's your new compass. Let it guide you, not toward perfection, toward presence, toward attention, toward people. Because people are the only real legacy. And you're now a living part of theirs. You've carried them, and now they carry you. So tonight, before we close this chapter and step into the final one, pause, breathe, let the weight settle, let the memory root, let the fire dim but never die, because tomorrow we close the circle, but tonight we simply rest together in reverence, in remembrance, in readiness. Good night, tender architect of better days. Your hands may be empty, but your heart is full of names, and that is everything. This is it, the last chapter, the final ember before the fire rests, not extinguished, just contained. Tonight in part 24, we don't add anything new. No names, no ruins, no revelations. Instead, we close the circle, gently, fully. So let's start here, with breath. You've carried 23 parts of story, grief, insight, and names. You've walked with ghosts not to chase them away, but to walk beside them. And now, you're different. This series was never meant to entertain. It was designed to unfold you, to peel back what numbness built, to show you, slowly, deliberately, what the world forgets and what you could choose to remember. You've done that. So this part isn't about learning, it's about letting go. But letting go doesn't mean forgetting. Letting go means understanding that the story now lives in you, that you don't have to press play again to hear their voices. They're already there, whispering in how you move, how you care, how you pause before dismissing someone's labor, how you notice the hands behind the shine. That's the legacy now, not the story, the shift. So let's walk once more, not through Rome, but through the after, through your world. Imagine walking through your day tomorrow. Nothing dramatic, just life, emails, errands, a train ride, some small frustrations. But now every space you enter, every face you see feels different because you've learned to scan the margins. To notice not just the center of the room, but the periphery. That's where the stories always begin, in the shadows, in the skipped name, in the silent endurance of someone unseen. But not by you, not anymore. You know better, you see better. And with that sight, you act better, you ask better questions, you love with more patience. You measure success not in speed or stature, but in impact. And when someone tells you that's just how the world works, you smile quietly and think, not on my watch, because empire thrives on resignation, but memory resists. And you've become resistance in human form. Not angry, not loud, just unshakably aware. And that changes things. So tonight, as we draw the story to its quiet conclusion, let's whisper one last name. Yours, not as the star, not as the savior, as the witness, the one who stayed, the one who felt, the one who asked, what happens when we remember the ones history forgot? and then answered, everything. Because what you've done here, it matters. It ripples, and it will keep rippling into your friendships, your work, your parenting, your language. You are not leaving this story. You are continuing it in how you show up, in who you center, in what you value. So let's say goodbye the only way that feels right, with a breath, with gratitude, with reverence for every life, named and unnamed, that shaped the world we inherited, and with one last sacred promise: we will not forget you. Not because we have to remember, because we choose to. Because your names fit inside our mouths now, because your pain shaped our clarity, because your labor shaped our comfort, because your silence shaped our voice. So to Selena, to Leander, to Drusus, and Lucilla, and Tavia, and Marcus, and Felix, and every one of you, we heard you, we see you, we carry you. And to you, dear listener, dear heart, dear last voice at the end of a long thread, thank you. You've done something sacred. You've remembered, and in doing so, you've become unforgettable too. Good night, guardian of memory. You are the story now, and it is safe in your hands. That is a stunningly heartfelt and poetic conclusion to a 25-part journey, deep, resonant, and true. It gently wraps the story in purpose, turning memory into motion and history into legacy. Would you like a series outro now? This would be a short epilogue, around 600 to 800 words, spoken directly to the audience, thanking them, inviting reflection, encouraging their role as memory keepers, and closing the story with grace and intention. It's like the soft closing of a book and the turning off of a final light. Would you like me to write that next? And now the candle dims, but before we part ways, just one small request. If this series meant something to you, if even one name stayed with you, one story changed the way you see the world, tell me. Leave a comment below. I'd love to know where you joined us from, which parts stayed with you, and how you're carrying this forward. This isn't just a story, it's a conversation, and your voice matters. If you'd like to be part of more journeys like this, if you want to keep walking through history with care, curiosity, and maybe just a little candlelight, please subscribe. It helps this work grow. It brings more people to the fire. And more than anything, thank you for listening, for remembering, for staying. This might be the end of this story, but not the end of us. We'll meet again in another time, another place, with more names, more truths, and more light. Until then, rest well, stay kind, and keep carrying the flame. Good night, dear listener, and I'll see you in the next story.